If there is one thing we've learned in recent years, it's that merely moments after a ruthless drug lord is captured by the authorities, a new one emerges to take the reins and continue to wreak havoc. A DEA source commented on this trend, saying, quote, "It was Chapo. Now it's Mencho, a man who many say is a deadlier drug lord than his predecessor." Following his rise to fame, El Mencho became the most wanted man in Mexico. But why exactly? In today's video, I will answer the question on everybody's mind. What happened to El Mencho? One unintended consequence of taking out El Chapo from the streets may have been opening the door for someone even worse, someone like El Mencho. Ruben Oseguera Cervantes, or more commonly known as El Mencho, was the new underworld boss that grabbed as much power as he could shortly after El Chapo's arrest, making the most of Sinaloa's subsequent instability. He created the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, or CJNG, that is now dominating the drug market. At first, CJNG was billing itself as a savior. They answered to the name Mata Zetas, or Zeta Killers. They dressed themselves in black paramilitary gear and posted propaganda videos online in which they claimed to be fighting the Zetas. "We do not extort, kidnap, rob, oppress, or in any other way disturb the national well-being," one video said. "Our only objective is to finish off the Zetas," or so they claimed. As the saying goes, all is not as it seems, and so it was soon revealed that CJNG weren't the good guys they claimed to be. Instead, they were just another cartel trying to protect and expand a drug empire. The good people of Mexico also learned pretty quickly that the CJNG was more bloodthirsty than the Sinaloa cartel. With El Mencho at the helm of affairs, the cartel delved deep into the game of drug trafficking and organized crime. They also gained notoriety for their constant use of dangerous illicit firearms. Under El Mencho's command, the CJNG became one of Mexico's leading criminal organizations. El Mencho was so bad that in no time, he became a man the authorities would do anything to get a hold of. In the US, he had a bounty of $10 million, and in the same vein, the Mexican authorities promised to give out 30 million Mexican dollars for any information that would lead to his arrest. With a reputation like the one El Mencho has built, it's hard not to wonder if he was always the man he is today. Was he always like this, or did something happen to change the course of his life? Let's find out how he got here. Ruben Oseguera Cervantes, aka El Mencho, was born on July 17, 1966, in the town Naranjo de Chila, a dusty mountain town in southwestern Michoacan. As one of 6 brothers in a family of poor avocado farmers, Ruben did not have the best childhood. To ease the burden of his struggling family, young Ruben dropped out of school in the 5th grade and started working in the fields. By the time he was 14, he graduated to guarding marijuana crops. Ruben, like many others, dreamed of more than avocados, so within a few years, he packed up and moved north to California. By 1986, he was already living in the Bay Area, where he was arrested by the state police for possession of stolen property and a loaded gun. It was only 2 months later his first child was born. It's unclear if Mencho served any time for the crime, but according to reports, it was during this time that he crossed the border several times to smuggle drugs under a variety of aliases like Ruben Avila and Roberto Salgado. According to more reports from the DEA and Mexican authorities, it was also during this time that he got his introduction and crash course into the meth trade. This was when, along with his wife's brother, Abigail Gonzalez Valencia, Mencho learned what would become the family business. Looking to climb up the ladder, Mencho joined the Sinaloa Protection Detail basically as a bodyguard, enforcer, and hitman. By 1989, Mencho was back in the city of San Francisco, where he was arrested again for selling drugs and was deported a few months later. He returned to the Bay Area by September 1992, where this time he was busted on federal charges. This time Mencho was arrested with his older brother, Abraham, after they were caught doing a 5-ounce heroin deal by undercover cops. Although not many people, including the prosecutor of Mencho's court-appointed defense attorney, can recall many details about the case, the court transcripts portray Mencho as a very shrewd defendant. He maintained that he was innocent, claiming he had nothing to do with the deal since the agents had not seen him with the drugs. In response to this, the prosecutor threatened that the brothers were a package deal. If Mencho didn't plead guilty, Abraham, with 2 felony convictions already to his name, would face a possible life sentence. In the end, Mencho pled guilty to protect his older brother, showing his loyalty. The soon-to-be drug lord was sentenced to 5 years at a private prison in West Covina, Texas, that housed mainly undocumented immigrants. Some sources claim that some of the gang members he met in prison were those he would later recruit to join CJNG. Mencho served 3 years, and he was released on parole in January 1997. The U.S. Marshals deported him back to Mexico as a hardened felon at 30 years old. a fatal mistake that would haunt both Mexico and US years later. Not much is known about the next few years, but according to reports from authorities, Mencho washed up in a Jalisco town called Tomatlan. He became an officer there with the Jalisco State Police, although it wouldn't be the first time a drug dealer had infiltrated the Mexican State Police, which is widely perceived as corrupt. The man who would ultimately terrorize the streets of Mexico eventually made his way to Guadalajara, where he joined the Milenio Cartel, a group that would ultimately catapult him to power. The Milenio Cartel had once been their own organization, but had started working for the more powerful Sinaloa Cartel under the leadership of Nacho Coronel, a Sinaloa co-founder and the uncle of El Chapo's wife. Coronel was a ruthlessly brutal criminal kingpin who ran the Guadalajara Plaza, and Mencho joined his protection detail as a bodyguard, enforcer, and hitman. With his law enforcement background, Mencho was already trained to handle security and counterintelligence. Some reports even add that he led his own network of sicarios or assassins on the orders of his Don. The Milenio organization was a thriving ground for Mencho because one of Coronel's nicknames was the King of Crystal. If you haven't guessed it yet, Nacho was given this nickname as a symbol of his control of the meth trade, which was a particular interest of El Mencho. At that point in time, meth production was flourishing in the rugged mountains around Jalisco, and thanks to his experience in the United States, Mencho was well positioned to take advantage of that fact. But by the year 2009, after Mencho had clawed his way up the cartel's ranks to become a top Milenio lieutenant, one of Milenio's leaders was arrested. 9 months later, Coronel himself was killed during an army raid on his Guadalajara mansion. With the top two bosses in Jalisco suddenly taken out of the equation, an ambitious Mencho wanted to step up to take their place. The cartel's leadership had other ideas though, as one of his colleagues got the nod instead of him. Mencho, upset about being passed over for leadership, broke off and started his own crew. This newly founded group promptly declared war on the Milenio and Sinaloa cartels to earn a name for themselves. The fighting claimed many innocent lives in the streets of Guadalajara, destroying the city's long-standing truce among the cartels and doubling the existing rate of cartel-related murders in Jalisco. Milenio cartel loyalists were killed, and everyone else was forced to flee. With that, Mencho won the battle and the war, and that was the beginning of the CJNG. As Mencho quickly built his criminal empire, his operation grew more complex. He invested heavily in submarines because he had the bright idea of using them to bring in narcotics from South America. According to the former DEA agent, Mencho even hired expert Russian naval engineers to help design the submarines to ensure no hitch in his plans. He avoided America's scrutiny by focusing on overseas markets such as Australia, where a kilo of cocaine could fetch quadruple the price it does in the United States. Mencho also employed more distracting techniques, like using fashion models to smuggle in drugs. According to reports from a former field agent, the CJNG traffickers would pose as magazine photographers with complete fake credentials and fly into Mexico with talent from Colombia and Venezuela. The authorities would be so distracted by the beautiful women that the drugs would slip right in, without giving El Mencho and his guys a lick of trouble. That aside, El Mencho took the meth trade to unprecedented heights. The CJNG were deeply rooted in methamphetamine trading and production. They also understood the economics behind it. Unlike cocaine and others which they had to buy from the Colombians, the cartel produced meth themselves, and so they controlled the larger share of profits. Unlike heroin and marijuana, meth didn't require large plots of land or good weather, just isolated areas to build labs. Guadalajara, which was El Mencho's turf, happened to have a big pharmaceutical industry, with young chemists full of the technical know-how necessary to make methamphetamine. To crown it all, there were accessible ports, which allowed the gang to smuggle in vast quantities of the dangerous chemicals needed from China and India. These ports also allowed them to smuggle out the finished product. While the CJNG was expanding its operations, the DEA was preoccupied with El Chapo's Sinaloa cartel. This distraction greatly benefited the CJNG and helped Mencho fly under the radar. And with business going great for the new drug lord, he began to make more of an appearance and a reputation, a notorious one. He soon made a statement by kidnapping Ivan and Jesus Alfredo Guzman, the sons of the previous Mexican drug lord El Chapo, when they made the mistake of partying on his turf. After negotiating with El Chapo himself from prison, he decided on accepting a ransom for the lives of the drug lord's sons. It was largely known that his original intention was to kill them, but he made the deal with the older Guzman. From Cancun to California, the warning was clear. El Mencho was gunning for the throne. Many largely believed that collecting ransom was not the reason the rich criminal kingpin kidnapped El Chapo's sons. He wanted to send a message saying, "Your old man is locked up now. Don't think you're untouchable." It was clear that Mencho was running the show now. From then on, El Mencho and his men took to painting the streets of Mexico red, and they did it with fervor. People likened the actions of the cartel under his rule to that of international terrorists like ISIS. The manner in which they kill and the sheer numbers are unparalleled even in Mexico, despite the country's history of drugs and gang violence. El Mencho had zero regards for human life. He was a guy who would execute a whole family down to the kids, based on not much more than a rumor. According to sources who claim to have met Mencho, he was a very shrewd businessman who didn't drink or engage in most vices a gang member might have. More importantly, he didn't trust anyone. His eccentricity is one of the reasons why the bloodthirsty drug lord has managed to remain safe from the hands of the law. In Mexico, you'd run into guys who had met Chapo, says a former DEA agent, but not Mencho. He's kind of a ghost. Today, Mencho remains a ghost, still with a large bounty. In February 2022, there were unconfirmed reports that began to surface, claiming that El Mencho died in a private hospital in Guadalajara. On the one hand, this might be true, but seeing how vicious the CJNG remains, it might merely be a hope. The problem with CJNG is that they are meth guys, and thus they're unhinged. Compared to the more established cartels that deal in most other illegal drugs, Mencho and CJNG are considered hillbillies and backwoods guys who made their reputation busting heads. They never had to wine and dine with Bolivian drug suppliers or fly to South America to do international negotiations because they simply made their most profitable product. They're not sophisticated, and they have no problem getting very rough.